Morning, Chris.
Morning, Tim.
Chris, we are doing a kind of business podcast today, CEO for a day, all will become clear. But we recorded this in about the middle of 2025, in fact, and it's now early 2026. So we wanted to just make it clear that there could be some updates on the stories we're covering here.
Yes, I mean, what we wanted to tell everyone is that we almost didn't publish this podcast. It can take us a while to get these edited and released. Some of you might have realised, but events nearly overtook us. And yet, this podcast has, in the last week or two, gained an unexpected relevance. So we've decided to bring it to you nevertheless. But we would ask that you bear in mind that some of the references are a little out of date, and we'll come to that afterwards with a little bit of an addendum.
Yeah, listen through to the end, and we will chime back in just to comment on what has happened since we recorded this, and then we'll look at following up. Anyway, here it is, CEO for a day. Let's take it away.
Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to The Watch Inquiry, the podcast that takes a journalistic look at the watch world past, present and future. With me, Chris Hall.
And me, Tim Barber.
Today, the question we're asking is, what would you do given the chance to be CEO of a major watch brand for a day?
Yeah, we are becoming consultants for the watch industry today, and we're going to, I'm sure, have new careers by the end of it once we've saved 4 particular watch companies that we think are in need of attention, right?
That's right. We're going to be parachuting ourselves into the boardrooms at 4 companies that are interesting, beloved, but perhaps not firing on all cylinders at the moment.
Yeah. The watch industry at the moment is in trouble anyway. There is quite a lot of angst.
Most of the major groups have posted losses or declining figures over the last financial year.
Yeah. I've actually been in Switzerland the last couple of days.
Right.
And the kind of behind the scenes story is really not pretty. You know, there are suppliers going bankrupt right now. There are companies that are laying off an awful lot of staff. There are companies that are struggling to pay their bills. So the general infrastructure of the industry is problematic at the moment, to say the least, I think.
Which makes for a really competitive landscape in which to be running a company that even prior to this perhaps wasn't operating at its full potential.
Yeah, exactly. The risks have become far riskier.
Yeah.
We decided that it's time to insert ourselves into the hot seat and sort this out. Thank us later, Switzerland. This is, I suppose, as watch journalists, what we kind of like dream of doing quite a lot of the time in our jobs, right?
Absolutely. We play armchair pundits. Everyone's a critic. It's easy to fix from the sidelines, but we're going to have a really good go at imagining what could in fact happen at some of these companies. And you're going to be kicking us off with a look at Montblanc watches, right?
I thought we'd start with Montblanc. And the reason is, I think that we have all been wanting Montblanc to work for many years. They've made some lovely, fantastic watches.
Yep.
But whenever you say to anybody kind of outside a good knowledge of the watch industry, you start talking about Montblanc, they will still say, as they have been saying for 20 years or more, but I thought they made pens.
Writing instruments.
Writing instruments is the correct nomenclature.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a problem that, with all the will in the world, they have not overcome.
Just remind me of the backstory here. So Montblanc first made watches in any serious manner in the 90s.
Yeah, they were bought by Richemont Group, and I think it was sort of in the late 90s, about 1997, that they entered the luxury watch market. So they've been there now for a while.
Coming up on 30 years, sure.
Yeah. And of course, the real transformation moment came with the acquisition of Minerva, historic watch company, in the mid-2000s. So that was acquired by Richemont in 2006 and absorbed into Montblanc.
So central to the situation here really is the decision at the strategic level to merge Montblanc and Minerva into one entity.
Yeah, let's talk about who Minerva is.
Sure.
So they were actually founded in 1858. Hence, Montblanc today has a collection called the 1858 collection, which is watches supposedly kind of inspired by the Minerva legacy. They became known as specialists in chronographs. I mean, if you've ever been to the Minerva factory, it's like stepping into a piece of history. You've been there, right?
I was there.
Recently.
Yeah, I was there last year, and it's terrific. It's
a sort of church of old school watchmaking skill, where they always show you where they still regulate the springs and the hairsprings in the old way. And I mean, there is no question really on the quality of what comes out of that factory, but the question is more about how it really integrates with Montblanc as a whole and what Montblanc is doing more broadly in watchmaking.
And what comes out of that factory is some 300 or so watches a year that are made in the manner of a high-end independent watch brand. And what comes out of Montblanc as a watchmaking brand is tens of thousands of watches, of which the Minerva stuff is a tiny percentage.
It's a tiny percentage, but it's given... Well, it's been intended to give Montblanc this kind of legitimacy, which is the word that people love in the luxury industry, which I would say it's kind of struggled with, and it's still struggling with.
Perhaps speaks to a recognition that the Minerva name has the power to sell watches, certainly at price points above the sort of 2,000 to 3,000 franc mark, where a lot of Montblanc products sort of traditionally resided.
Yeah. So if you have a company that's famed in making or writing instruments, and you decide you want to start making watches, and obviously Montblanc is now more of a kind of wider luxury goods company. It's got a leather division there, and even now doing headphones, and let's not forget smartwatches.
Absolutely.
Something we haven't heard too much about, and I cannot see it surviving into the future, really. I mean...
Well, I couldn't see it surviving as long as it has, so I know from that perspective, I wouldn't actually bet against it, but there you go.
True. They are, I would say, one of these brands that has thrown everything under the sun they can at this idea of creating a joined-up watch offering, right? And we've seen, for a time, there were motoring-style watches. There were sort of sports chronographs called time walkers.
Yep.
They found this historic watchmaker, Nicholas Rieussec, who was credited with invention of the chronograph, for a time.
Yeah, until Louis Moynier's Comte came out of the woodwork.
Yeah, Louis Moynier, another historic brand that it turns out made a chronograph device even earlier. And Rieussec's invention was, I think it was for horse racing, and it would draw a line.
Yeah, an inking chronograph. They used to
exactly, an inking chronograph. And so therefore they thought, this is a perfect thing to match up with a company that makes pens. It's writing and time at the same point. So
very neat.
And so then they made this chronograph inspired by that, called the Nicholas Rieussec chronograph, which is a very peculiar looking watch. And they've done quite a few strange. They've gone down some strange avenues, Montblanc, with their watches. So I mean, now we have suddenly 2 or 3 years ago, we entered the diving watch realm, and it's it's diving watch as general outward bound sports watch, because they go, well, we're named after a mountain, so obviously you would want to climb mountains with a Montblanc watch on that. And
with the ice, this is the iced sea. It's evocative of glaciers. It's evocative of adventure.
Yes, and they have this ice flow kind of dial design. They have laser inscribed pictures on the back.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all over the place, if you ask me.
The sort of singular technological attribute of these in the last couple of years has been this notion of sucking all the air out of a watch. Like, in principle, that is good for a watch movement, but in practice, it's not really been deemed necessary by anyone else, and there might be a good reason for that.
It is, I think, true to say that nobody was requesting the idea of air being sucked out of a watch. This year, Montblanc has started offering a service where you can go and have the air sucked out of your watch on demand. And
maybe it's happening by their droves.
Maybe they are absolutely overrun with people asking for this.
I think the bigger point is that Montblanc's attempted to live in the mainstream, but has done so in a slightly quirky but haphazard manner that has seen it try out slightly oddball ideas.
It's gone this way and that, and there is still, I think, it's very difficult to kind of go, this is what Montblanc watchmaking is about. This is the price point that it's meant to be in. This is the market that we're addressing. And so it feels very disjointed. Now, then you apply Minerva to it. Now, as watch specialists, as watch geeks, this is in some ways the thing that we really care about as well. Yeah. It's not to say that, a lot of these watches aren't very nice, well-made watches from Montblanc.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, a lot of people who will hold a tremendous amount of affection for Minerva as a historic name. There's also Minerva from the 1990s, before Richemont bought it, when it went through this period after the family, the Frey family, I think it was, that owned it back then. And then it was in private ownership. I think it was Italian owners for a while. And they made some really sumptuous watches, tiny, tiny numbers. And this was kind of the operation that Richemont Group was carrying on. And it continued for a while and then began to sort of disappear underneath these layers of Montblancness. Okay, so what are we going to do about this? It's a bit of a mess. It's unconvincing. And I feel like we've tried everything and it's time to just turn the experiment on its head.
Sure.
So my solution to this, day one as CEO, it is time finally to free Minerva from the Montblanc mark. I think that probably people who are buying Minerva-made chronographs and watches today are very often going to be buying them despite the Montblanc name on the dial, not because of.
Yeah, I think that's quite possibly the case. And is it true to say that perhaps slightly in the company's defense, the timing seems right to do that now because there are others doing similar, and it might not have been okay 10 years ago, for example, to take that leap?
I think that 10 years ago, it was much easier to kind of join these dots. You didn't have to be that focused, and you could take a story like, for instance, Nicholas Riusek and Minerva and sort of smush them up together and go, generally, we're in the luxury watch business and we can do this stuff. And by the way, that did produce some really nice watches, but the spirit of that is really blurred. Let's look at, for instance, what's happening over at LVMH with Daniel Roth and Gerald Genter, and the tactic there is really to treat these brands as though they're part of the independent sector. How they're using La Fabrique du Temps, doing these very, very beautiful, very artisanal, low volume, even going down the sort of the subscription route.
Yeah, it's how it's positioned to the target market, right? How they're talking to collectors.
They know who their market are, and their market is extremely knowledgeable. They're not just people who are going to be sucked in by a name. And the point is that, for me, Montblanc isn't a name that works upwards within that Minerva sphere anyway.
Right.
Montblanc, for all that within, if you know your pens very well, there are these, there are bespoke pens, incredibly creative, high-end things. But largely speaking, Montblanc is an airport luxury brand, right? It's executive luxury, very nice leather goods, but it's pretty straight down the line. It's pretty conservative. It's Louis Vuitton. It is not.
Do you think that might have been the thinking that because Montblanc can make brilliantly crafted pens, writing instruments, pens, do you think that was the thinking that could map onto watches? To say, look, we have got legitimacy here in category A at this price point, at this level of craftsmanship. We can turn that into legitimacy here in category B.
It might well have been, but the funny thing is, I mean, we in the watch world don't very much come into the pen making side of things. They don't talk about that particularly when they bring out these watches. I think if you were to go into one of the enormous sort of palaces of Montblanc in Shanghai or somewhere where they have these five-story shops, maybe it's a different story. And we always have to sort of have in the back of our minds on these things, what is the market? Where are these things doing the most business? For instance, their Star Legacy collection, is sort of has a big kind of Asian slant in terms of it being very dressy, and that's where it does a lot of business. But I think that it is, as you say, it is the right time to let Minerva spread its wings again and stop being dragged down by a link up that doesn't work. By all means, keep it on the Montblanc balance sheet, but treat it as a delicate, special, separate thing that it is, and elevate it again.
Here's a question for you then. I don't think there's much doubt in either of our minds, and probably in the minds of the collectors listening who will love Minerva for what Minerva is. There's no doubt in our minds that Minerva, I think, given the right treatment, could be a success. A la Daniel Roth, a la Ferdinand Berthoud is another example. if this separation is carried out as you've proposed, can Montblanc watches be a bigger success than it currently is on its own merits, with a collection and an offering that's better defined as Montblanc?
I genuinely question whether it needs to be. I think, so the other side of my kind of decision-making is obviously to focus back down on the Montblanc collections as they are. Right. They use the Minerva story in a pretty unsophisticated way, but I think that if you removed the name 1858 from the 1858 collection, there isn't much of Minerva within that until you get up to these sort of high-end chronographs.
Well, yeah, taking away that legitimacy that Minerva confers, you're left with a little bit of an identity vacuum, I suppose, unless you really lean back into what Montblanc already represents and create watches that are much more closely aligned with that.
I think that's the point, that we have gone down many generic paths. And if they say that Iced Sea and the Mountain Zero Oxygen thing is doing good work for them at the moment, by all means continue that. It doesn't need Minerva to be part of that. But I think once you remove Minerva, then you are able to refocus down on what Montblanc can be as a watch brand in a more streamlined and effective way now. It's the presence of Minerva in the story is in some ways an admission of the fact that we do not have history in this. But in the same way, now, you don't necessarily need the history in this. Look at what Hermes have done in watches. You know, there is legitimacy in being a luxury brand in the watch industry now that there wasn't in some ways in the early 90s and even in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So refocus in on what Montblanc means as a creative house of luxury and let Minerva be what Minerva is, which is an absolute trove of very, very fine watchmaking. And don't let lime gold anywhere near it, because my gosh, that is peculiar looking. So that's my idea for Montblanc.
All right, well, I think that's a day's work. Well done. I look forward to seeing this new independent Minerva for sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Indeed. All right. We're going to stay with Richemont Group, however, are we not?
Yes, we are. We're going to go to a quick break, and when we get back, I'm going to be talking about Jaeger-LeCoultre, or JLC.
The mothership of watchmaking. Okay.
Could be.
All right. We'll see you after the break. Support for the Watch Inquiry comes from Richard Anderson, a legend in English tailoring whose new store, Riches, is the last word in ready-to-wear elegance and style. If you value the craft and beauty of a fine wristwatch, you'll like the same qualities in a handmade garment too, which is what Richard has been creating on London's Savile Row for over 40 years. Now, the king of bespoke has brought that same mastery to ready-to-wear. At Riches, you'll find Japanese denim, moleskin trousers, Scottish knitwear, raincoats, and some fabulously natty silk dressing gowns that I've personally got my eye on, and plenty else besides. It's all cut from Richard's own patterns, made in small runs and built to last. It's English craft without the compromise and without the weight. Explore the full collection at richardandersonlimited.com, or even better, visit Richards in person at number 13 Savile Row. Welcome back, everybody, to the Watch Inquiry. Chris, in our jobs as consultants to the watch industry, we are going to Le Sentier and Jaeger-LeCoultre.
Absolutely. Now, this is a brand that I think a huge number of people have a great amount of fondness for.
The watchmaker of watchmakers.
The watchmaker of watchmakers. The watchmaker's watchmaker. It is made of makers. And if nothing else, before we even get into it, I'll be hiring a new copywriter. That's by the by. Now, JLC has actually had a new CEO recently, of course, Jérôme Lambert.
Also its old CEO.
Yes, he was appointed in 2024, having been CEO previously from 2002 to 2013. And in between then, he went to work at Montblanc, and then he sort of ascended the executive ladder within Richemont.
So he's been overseeing Richemont Group watchmaking
100%
as a whole.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the glory days of JLC in some ways were under his tenure.
Yes,
and also the best days of Montblanc.
We'll have a think about what that might mean for the brand now, going forwards. But I have the audacity to nudge him out of the way just for a second. So, of course, I think most people listening will know JLC. They are a bona fide, 100% high-quality watchmaking brand.
Yeah.
So what could possibly be wrong? Well, a little corporate context, at least to start with. Richemont doesn't break down results brand by brand, but the specialist watchmakers division is down 13% year on year. It was down the year before as well, 2 or 3%.
Yeah.
So the bare figures alone indicate that things are not rosy.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, been known for some time that JLC hasn't really found its place in today's watch market.
I think that it's that sense that we all have, really, that it used to be one of the most exciting brands to cover and to find out what it had that was new.
Yep.
And over the last 6, 7, 8 years, that excitement has just dissipated.
Yes, I think there's that. I think, JLC was often right outside that big three of AP, Patek and Vacheron.
Yeah.
On quality grounds, nothing has happened to diminish that, but people don't really look at it in that way anymore. And it's funny because we're sitting here and it's not long after Watches and Wonders 2025, where it was, by all accounts, acknowledged to have had a really good showing.
There were some stonking reversos, the all-gold reverso,
the
old-time geographic version. Beautiful.
Lovely watches. And this is not just to be contrarian or overly cynical for the sake of it, but I can't help feeling that it does paper over the cracks to an extent, because JLC will always have the ability to go back and say, yeah, we're going to make a beautiful reverso, because that's just sort of like playing the hits or playing the hit over and over again.
The only thing I'd say about that is that, yes, it is, except for the fact that this year I found myself excited by the reverso in a way that I've been bored by their reverso releases for a very long time. So they do seem to have sparked something with 1 or 2 very special watches. But yes, I agree with you.
Let me propose my basic thesis about what problem affects JLC as a brand, right? I don't know what it is the best at in the world, and I'll elaborate. I think it goes to its position within the Richemont Group because it is not allowed, I don't mean this is literally a written down rule, but it's effectively not permitted to be better than some of the other brands under the same corporate umbrella. Okay? It can't really be the most elegant dressy watchmaker because Cartier owns that space.
Right.
It can't be higher end and more prestigious than Vacheron Constantin or Lange & Sonne.
Yeah.
It can't be sportier or more successful in the sort of sporty space than IWC and Panerai. You see where I'm going with this? I feel like it's hemmed in on all sides.
It butts up against too many other brands and too many other corners of the Richemont Group. I mean, for instance, it's great at General Tourbillons.
Yeah, the high-end mastery is sort of not to be questioned. My point really is that it doesn't have legitimacy, if you like, to keep coming back to that term, to sort of compete on an equal footing with these other brands.
So is it a product problem, or is it a sort of a positioning and marketing problem, in your view?
I do think it's both, because we come back to this idea of watchmaking excellence that we introduced it with. The brand strength is to be a phenomenal movement maker, a master of complications. Firstly, I'd like to ask you, what was the last new caliber from JLC? What was the last all-new caliber? What was the last one that really impressed you?
I don't know, because even some of the high-end ones we've seen in the last few years were sort of remakes of past glories, like the return of the Duomètre watches last year.
Exactly. Upgraded, improved, sure. I'll concede that movement development's the most expensive side of watchmaking. Yeah. You don't do it all the time. You don't do it just for the sake of it, as I said. But if it's your brand story, I think you need to stay close to it. It feels like more often in recent times the brand stories become Art Deco elegance through the reverso, which is good and watch fans love it, but it's relatively limited in the mainstream.
But JLC has a fantastic lineage and range of classic round dress watches in the Master collection, but that is a line that's sort of just been off to the side and slightly forgotten about in the last few years. I mean, I love those watches, but gosh, they need some uplift and some attention.
Yeah, they haven't been much spoken about, and it's like a chicken and egg, but they haven't been much spoken about, I think, because they weren't selling terrifically well. A few years ago, that whole sort of genre of watch was really out of favour. We are seeing it come back into favour a little bit, which may play into JLC's hands.
I mean, the interesting comparison there is something like the 1908 from Rolex, which is actually, in some ways, it's a higher spec watch than what you get from JLC now. at almost exactly the same price, around about £18,000.
100%. And price, since you mention it, is another factor. With high price rises, taking a base level Reverso up by about 40% in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
For no discernible change in what you got for your money.
Yeah,
okay, and we all know
it's eye-watering now.
Yeah, and for all that we've been impressed by some of the watches that the brand's shown in the last couple of years, they have really, really been focusing more and more on that higher-end client. And actually, the core business, I mean, let's not forget, this is another company which is selling, give or take, 70, 80,000 watches a year. They're not all Hybris Mechanicas and World Time Reversos. That's the bread and butter of the business. Is elsewhere.
Well, where does Polaris fall within your thesis?
Well, I feel like it came onto the scene because there was a recognition, a slightly belated recognition, that bracelet-led sporty designs were necessary. But it arrived as pretty much a sort of straight-up sports watch, admittedly a slightly with an elevated price tag that put it above an Omega or whatever, and actually adding things like perpetual calendars. That, for me, is the most successful iteration of Polaris.
So the Polaris 60s dive watch that was little known, kind of rediscovered. They'd done some very favoured limited editions of this, and then they went, okay, well, we've got this dive watch in our history. Let's kind of Blancpain it.
Yes, we can spin it out and evolve it and grow a collection around what was a very, very small part of our history. Yeah,
that for me was the moment when JLC pivoted from being the made of makers idea to being made of spreadsheets. You know, that's when it sort of, you felt that it was following the market. Suddenly the Reverso was sort of iterated in a range of colors, that there was it all became a little bit less inspired.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. So here's my sort of bold, idiotic, some would obviously say, but I think do or die proposal.
All right, yeah, I want to hear this.
Secede. Okay.
Do what?
Secede. Cast off the Richemont Group ownership and punt yourself out into the ocean of independence.
Just walk out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
nobody will mind. And somebody will buy it. Who are you buying it?
Yes.
Are you putting up the investment for this?
To think that I haven't necessarily considered every element of this is outrageous, slanderous. But no, I mean, what I'm considering is the thought experiment that JLC would be better placed were it independent. I'm not obviously imagining that it's in any way practical for that to happen.
But act like you are.
I mean, just imagine a world in which it is. Just imagine a world in which it isn't owned by Richemont and is somehow stable as a commercial entity. Of course,
yes. I mean, we don't know. I mean, obviously there are network advantages to being part of a group in terms of case making, straps, and all of that kind of stuff. But
of course,
put that to one side. In terms of the strategy, so under your leadership, you've mentally taken JLC out of Richemont Group. So what changes does that allow you to make?
Here's a way of answering that, okay? What is so stopping JLC from being an out-and-out competitor to Patek Philippe? And looking at the product portfolio, the level of horological endeavour, the ambition, the expertise from top to bottom, you can maintain a fairly mixed portfolio. I think it should do that. It should push for that level of excellence in every department. And JLC isn't starting from nowhere. They've got amazing history. They've got brand presence. They've got loyalty. Go for it. Just go for the highest end mainstream watch offering possible.
So does that mean go for it in terms of doing more of the grand complications, the heavily complicated stuff, or uplifting the core of the collection at the moment to a higher level than it's at, or both of those?
I genuinely think it could be both. I think given independent status, JLC has the expertise and the know-how to have a hero product that's every bit as competent as an AP Universelle, a Vacheron Solaria, a grand complication from Lange & Söhne. And then you say, as you were saying, and then yes, I think you uplift the movement proposition within the core collections because again, this is your strength. And you can go away and say, okay, Patek Philippe's got its advanced research division. We need something a bit like that where we poke at the edges of the envelope of watchmaking. And in the meantime, the core product is going to outrank our competitors on technical specs. We're going to make superlative movements for a luxury watch audience.
And if you don't mind bringing back the geophysic while you're doing it, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh, hell yes.
Because that's
please.
my favourite JLC watch by a mile from the last kind of 10 years or so, which didn't hang around for nearly long enough. Though I suspect it was because it was a difficult, something of a difficult baby.
Well, I put this in the fourth wheel quite recently, and I said that it didn't really fit within the brand because of what sort of happened to it within the brand. It got transformed into a line of Tourbillon World Timers when the original
was completely forgot that.
The deadbeat True Seconds.
Yeah.
It
was a deadbeat seconds. They called it something else, but it was a deadbeat seconds.
No, that can come back. I'll sign that off for sure. But look, those are my grand visions for JLC, and I shall now hand back to you.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going from one big group to another, and we're going to be talking about Blancpain.
Ah, yes.
Okay, yeah, we're looking at one of the brands that is really associated with the rise of watchmaking in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And probably had its kind of pinnacle moment quite a while ago and has been somewhat flopping about in the shallows or in the depths as a diving watch brand for quite a long time.
Right.
So what do we know Blancpain for? We know it for the 50 Fathoms, obviously, the first diving watch, according to most, but obviously that's contested by some. We know it for the Villeray collection, which is its very classical collection that includes its sort of high complications. There's an Air Command, the pilot's watch.
We don't know it for the Air Command, let's be brutally honest.
And the Ladybird, which is a very small women's watch, which I'm sure
that's cool.
Business for them, it's fine. But principally, it's 50 Fathoms and Villeray, but these days, really, it's 50 Fathoms, which is part of the problem. The other thing that Blancpain quite likes to be known for is claiming the title of the oldest watch brand in the world, because a chap called Jehan-Jacques Blancpain set up as a watchmaker back in 1735. But therein lies quite a lot of the issue with Blancpain, which is that it doesn't really know who or what it is, because although it's named after the business that Jehan-Jacques founded in 1735, in fact, Blancpain, as we know it, is based upon an entirely different business that took his name. Luxury brands have been built on myths. Okay, it's not that sort of controversial in some ways, but how it feeds into the product is what I'm really interested in. And then essentially, that company Blancpain created a watch that was called the 50 Fathoms and gives us one side of Blancpain today.
Yeah,
and the other company, which was a company called Frederick Piguet, which was a movement maker. They were both movement makers. There are no famous pocket watches that I know of with the name Blancpain on the dial. But the other business, Frederick Piguet, which is a valet de joux movement maker, made what we now know of as the Villeray collection, which is to say, back in the 80s, the descendant of Mr. Frederick Piguet, a guy called Jacques Piguet, joined forces with a guy called Jean-Claude Biver, who is just all over so many of the stories you talk about in the watch industry.
Yeah.
And they created this brand. And of course, they had Frederick Piguet, the business, the manufacturer. You can't call the brand Frederick Piguet because there's already a Piguet in the world, Audemars Piguet, and it's based next door. So they were able to do a piece of horological theatre, effectively, by taking the name Blancpain, which had been owned by Omega by that point and had sort of disappeared in the mid-70s as an entity, and building afresh, let's say.
Yeah, part theatre, part transplant surgery.
Yeah, and what they did was, the most famous thing, the 6 masterpieces that they produced in the 80s that were fundamental. It was almost like sort of Langer and Söhne that refounded watchmaking in Germany, and there's a sort of comparable instance where they were focusing on the high complications, ultra thin, complete calendar with a moon phase, perpetual calendar, 6 core watches, and then in 1990 they put all of these into a single watch, the 1735, which was one of the sort of the benchmark grand complications.
There's a huge statement of intent, and at that point, a very almost controversial declaration that high-end watchmaking was not dead.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so the Villeray collection of today is the descendant of those watches. In fact, it the aesthetic has barely evolved, which is part of the problem because it's quite dusty and fusty now, and has been really sort of put to one side for much too long.
So before we go to task on the designs, let me get this. I think you have an issue with the fact that the Villeray collection, named after one town in the Swiss valleys, is based on a brand from Le Brassus.
Yeah, there's a complete dislocation here.
Right,
and this is part of my thesis, and it's also part of my solution. So you can see why they had to do it then, which was you create a high watchmaking brand and you name it after the town that your ostensibly named founder came from.
Sure.
That's a completely different part of Switzerland to where this brand is based, which is in the Vallée de Joux, the town of Le Brassus. Now, I want to just explain a little bit of Swiss geography here. So the town of Villeray is about 55 miles away from Le Brassus, and it's in a completely different kind of geographical and mental landscape in terms of Swiss watchmaking, because the Vallée de Joux is a very, very specific place. It's the home of the Grand Complications. It's the home of Audemars Piguet. It's where Vacheron has its workshop for its highest watchmaking today. Patek has a workshop there. And it has its own traditions. And it's ostensibly that kind of watchmaking that the Villeray collection celebrates, but with a name that's from a completely different region.
So what's Villeray watchmaking look like?
Well, Minerva is from Villeray, for instance. But Villeray is much more associated with the kind of like the technical sides that you get up in the northern part of this area that is Watch Valley. It's to do with precision. It's to do with measuring timing. It's less to do with the kind of the beauteous arts.
I take your point that there might be, factually speaking, an inconsistency here. But if I'm a high-end watch collector around the world, didn't take your pick, but I mean, I could be in Shanghai, I could be in Texas, I could be wherever you like. What does it really matter to me that these two towns are 50 miles apart? Isn't it all still fine Swiss watchmaking?
This is much less to do with what it matters to you and how it matters to the brand internally.
Okay.
Because this is my thesis, that these narrative threads have become so frayed that it's filtered through into how this brand has become stalled in what it does.
Okay.
And so, for instance, a couple of years ago, we had the 70th anniversary of the 50 Fathoms.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, it was a bit of a damp squib, really. It was, they spread it over, I don't know, they called it these 4 chapters of watches that were rather recherche, limited editions. It was almost impossible to cover it as a journalist because they would call each of these watches Chapter 1, Chapter 2. How do you write about Chapter 3? When you can't write about Chapter 1 and 2, it was very, very disjointed.
Yeah, okay.
Meanwhile, the Villeray collection has become just sort of stuck in an aesthetic that feels outmoded, that feels out of date, and that hasn't had anything new in it for a long time.
Now tell me, there must be, 10 or 20 Villeray collection pieces, perhaps?
Yes, add another 0 onto that. 200, what we should say, SKUs, different references within that collection alone.
So in your first morning as CEO, you're chopping that down
absolutely
substantially.
Yeah, but when they created it in the 80s, it was rare. It was specifically limited, and it's become this kind of amorphous blob.
Yeah.
So you need to cut that down, and you need to find what's special about it. And it's not about celebrating a myth. Go towards the market that cares about this. Treat it carefully.
You want to elevate the watchmaking. I mean, there already are high complications and métier d'art pieces.
You've got to go collector first, right?
Okay.
You've got to go towards the collectors again, rather than towards a sort of a generalist luxury market of people. Now, I mean, of course, there is a much wider market out there than the narrow, most knowledgeable collectors, but you please those people and you also give yourself a sense of focus. Blancpain has become such an unfocused brand,
right,
in its storytelling, in its designs, in almost everything it does. It needs to focus down,
right,
make classical high complication watchmaking important again. Put out a 40mm 50 Fathoms that is not a bathyscaphe because, my God, that's what people are crying out for. Stop benchmarking the watches against, marketing briefs, and start benchmarking against the Vallée de Joux itself and make that your focus.
Is there a point to be made here that perhaps you and I are prescribing quite similar medicine for a lot of these brands that operate in the same segment of the market? How can Blancpain stand apart from JLC or indeed from any other brand at that sort of level? What's it got to do to be itself?
Well, this is the problem. What is itself? That's the entire issue here. There is no itself. What is itself is in some ways a mystery. It's a construct, but it has a huge amount of resource and skills to do more here, and it needs to invest in it. Principally, Blancpain needs investment. Okay, Swatch Group has been, heavily criticised, including by activist investors right now, for taking its eye off the ball on its high-end brands. The corner may have been turned with Breguet, or may be turning. They indeed do have a new CEO who's a product guy. Blancpain needs to be attended to, and it needs to be invested in, and it needs to drop some of the mythology that is enabling it to be so uneven in what it does.
Right. Okay. I think the mention of Breguet is interesting because there's a perception that the two are sort of sides of the same coin, if you like. And
yes, they're definitely not the same. They both begin with B. They're both owned by Swatch Group, and they've both been left much too much in the shadows in the past few years. The one thing you can say about them both is that they were both once essential to the conversation and to the idea of what a desirable, important, and beautiful watch was and is. And they have kind of left the stage. And it's very clear that within Swatch Group, for a long time, there has been much more of an interest upon Omega and upon Tissot and some of the lower end brands, and indeed upon Swatch. And a sense that these brands, Breguet, Blancpain, also Jaeger-LeCoultre, Harry Winston to an extent, and there hasn't been a pathway for them to follow. If I was an investor in Swatch Group, I would be wanting to see some change on that.
Listen, I've got a question. One question before we move on, and you've mentioned Swatch. As CEO today, for your one day, although I feel like you might need more, would you continue with the Scuba 50 Swatch collab?
No. I don't think they should have done it in the first place, and I think it's inessential. It's fine that it's there, but no, and end that.
Okay.
And I think the Moon Swatch is going great guns. The Scuba is, I imagine, not troubling the figures very much.
All right.
But I think reinvigorating what Blancpain has, and frankly, what Frederic Piguet built and is able to do as a movement maker, as a complication specialist, but in a much more focused, updated style and manner, with much more attention on the quality of what it's doing is what is needed.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like you got your work cut out for you with that one.
I'm happy to take it on.
You take it on, okay. Broad shoulders, our man here.
Yeah, I'm ready for it, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to take us over to Japan, if you don't mind.
Okay.
But for our fourth and final brand in this episode, we're going to look at what could be done given a day in charge of Grand Seiko.
Right.
Now, this might sound interesting.
Seiko's doing great. Everybody loves Grand Seiko. What are you talking about?
Watch fans love Grand Seiko. You're right. And this is controversial. And I won't be conducting quite such root and branch surgery as perhaps we have done with other brands. So, obviously, Grand Seiko, very, very brief précis if you need it. Founded in 1960. Japan only until 2010, so half a century of this mystique of a product you can only buy in its domestic market. 2010, it goes global, finally. Yep. The branding at this point, we should remind listeners, was Seiko at 12, Grand Seiko below in the Gothic script.
Oh, on the dial.
On the dial, exactly. Sorry, yes, I'm meaning on the
dial. Oh, yeah, it would say, yes, it said Seiko and Grand Seiko on the dial.
Those two sort of things coexisted. Yeah. But in 2017, it becomes its own brand. Hallelujah. The logo moves to 12 o'clock. The Gothic script is its own thing. Since then...
And it finally becomes available in countries like this one.
Yes, exactly. There was, I think, a sense that this was finally the turning point that Grand Seiko needed. And I picked Grand Seiko because I think my work as CEO for a day might be a bit easier, whereas some brands need work on the product and they need work on the actual quality of the watches and they need work on all kinds of things. Grand Seiko has all that down. Yeah. We know the watches are well made. We know they look great. I think at their price level, the movements are as attractive as any can be. And like you said, it hasn't floundered. It's not in grave trouble. But over the last 8 years, I think it's become apparent that some of those problems with brand organization and communication remain. I'm not here to say that they need to make better watches. We are going to talk briefly about what maybe they might make some different watches. But no, I mean, the problem for me is really that Grand Seiko, in the minds of the mainstream watch consumer, already has a bit of a disadvantage in that you need to explain the difference between Grand Seiko and Seiko. Now, they do try that as well they can.
This is a difficult thing to get across to a lot of people who know Seiko and don't understand quite what Grand Seiko is.
Exactly. I think you can and add to that the product families for Grand Seiko are slightly unknowable, slightly indistinguishable from each other. There's a masterpiece collection, a heritage collection, a sport collection, which is, again, as better articulated, an elegance collection, and an Evolution 9 collection. And 4 of those 5, not the sport one, they all sort of share a very similar design language.
There's a huge amount of overlap, and I'm sure there's watches that appear in more than one of them as well.
It's quite possible. And then the third element of, I think, confusion in the minds of the everyday customer is that watches are known only by jumbles of letters and numbers, or alphanumeric codes.
SGBY...
SLGB003, SBGD223. It's
44GS.
It's back office stuff, and this isn't what you want front and center in the minds of the enthusiast. Now, Grand Seiko fans have made their peace with this, but we're not talking about appeasing the fans.
Embrace it because it gives them a kind of a velvet rope to stand behind.
Yes, gatekeeping.
It's very much gatekeeping.
That's another topic for another podcast. But yes, I want to talk about what you need to do to make the brand more accessible to somebody who might be considering a watch at this price level. You need knowable names, and there are nicknames that the community has bestowed on watches, and some of them have been adopted by the brand, like the Snowflake. But it's an exception, not the rule.
Yeah. I would like to sort of propose that one of the things you include in your plan is that they need to find something else to name their dials after other than the natural world. We've had a lot of snowy mountainsides and forests and things like that. It's so repetitive.
Mist rising off the surface of the lake at dawn.
Yeah, and in some ways it shouldn't matter because for the buyer, it's maybe less of an issue than it is for us as journalists who get sent press release after press release. But it somehow gives it this feeling that we're repeating a formula, and it just gets that little bit less exciting each time, even though, they have hit upon something, which is that we can make lovely dials with interesting textures, but it's become a formula from something that was strange and strangely exciting.
Yeah, it has become a bit rinse and repeat. And I think it's worth mentioning that credit where credit's due, Grand Seiko was doing really cool dials before everybody else realised that's what was necessary. But in other areas, the brand hasn't been ahead of trends. I think it's let lots of easy wins pass itself by in terms of being very, very boxed in and constrained in terms of what materials it'll use and how it'll use them and what case shapes and styles it's prepared to accept. And the very, very few attempts there have been to move outside the grammar of design language, which begins in the 1960s, watches like the 44GS. The few attempts there have been to move outside that haven't been wholly successful. And I think that there needs to be, I'm afraid to say, I think a recognition that in perhaps direct contradiction of another episode of this podcast, they could do with collaborating externally. They could do with inviting outside design talent and finding other ways to maybe work with their aesthetic.
To some degree, I mean, this is a cultural thing, isn't it? When you speak to people, I mean, I think you and I have both done the trip to Seiko and Grand Seiko in Japan, and you try and sort of work this stuff through with the Seiko and Grand Seiko executives, and it's quite difficult to find common ground in terms of how you even think about brand and what a brand is and about collections, and the sort of the need for there to be some kind of understandable kind of family tree in where things come from and what they mean.
And I think, not to get sidetracked too much, but you're absolutely right. The corporate structure behind the public-facing brand and product is incredibly labyrinthine and sort of complicated. And the management structure within the company is very dense, very bureaucratic. And those constrain, or those influence the output that we see as consumers. So there's something to the corporate culture that needs to be lightened, made a little bit more modern, dare I say. I think it's still...
I mean, the wider company makes an awful lot of other things. I mean, Epson printers and robot-made Seiko watch movements and things like that. And if you run the whole company with the same kind of corporate ethos almost as bigger industrial companies, that's kind of how this feels sometimes.
What I think we might do from Grand Seiko, I'm going to round off on this, is to say that, first and foremost, we've said let's introduce a snappier, peppier approach to marketing and product categorization and naming. Let's freshen up design a little bit. Then I think we also need to look at whether the product could be more ambitious.
Right.
Okay, this is Japan's highest end watchmaker. Crador exists as an artisanal sort of sub-studio of Grand Seiko, and what they make is rightly loved. But there's space for there to be something high-end on a higher volume level. Now, the Kodo Tourbillon that was released a few years ago speaks to the fact that this might be the direction of travel, but we haven't really had indications that that is the case. I'd like to see a stronger commitment from Grand Seiko to make watches that compete with some of the brands we've been talking about, price-wise, from 10 to 100,000 pounds, francs, whatever, and get more deeply invested in complications, because for one thing I'm certain of is that there is the know-how, there is the expertise, there is the acumen.
It's quite difficult. I mean, Crador is basically sort of Japanese market only at the moment, and again, it's sort of quite difficult to know, is it actually part of Grand Seiko or is it something that's separate? We don't know. And it's possible, that they are taking a slow approach to this and do have plans in the long run to let this go wider once they feel that they've got Grand Seiko as a brand to where they need to be. But I think I agree with you. It brings another angle to it. And whereas things like the Kodo sort of seems to exist somewhat in a vacuum, even within Grand Seiko, you would hope that something wider will grow from this.
Kodo might be evidence that the handbrake's finally being released, but I want to give you one last sort of case study, if you like, from this year. At Watches and Wonders, Grand Seiko showed a spring drive UFA, ultra-fine adjustment, and it's accurate to some ridiculous degree.
Yeah, it's like 20 seconds a year or something like that. Exactly. Absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah. I think it should have been the technical story of the fair.
Yeah, I agree.
And it was blown out of the water by Rolex's Land Dweller. The UFA spring drive is easier to understand to the average consumer. It's easier to communicate why it's good. I'd argue it's almost even more practical. But it was far less heralded, and of course because Rolex is Rolex and Grand Seiko.
Also because storytelling. It's that when you ask them, so what have you done to make this spring drive that's already massively accurate, a million times more accurate? That story hasn't really been properly unpacked, or wasn't at the time. They also missed their own anniversary of Spring Drive. Last year was the 25th anniversary of Spring Drive, and they put this out later. Maybe it just wasn't ready. But it does seem to be a lost story that is, frankly, absolutely incredible. It really is mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing. We've talked about cultural factors here, and without wishing to overly stereotype or generalize, heaven forbid offend, there is a modesty, I think an institutional modesty in Japanese craftsmanship that is admirable on a human level when you go there and you see them and you meet them. And it is always nice to under-promise and over-deliver. But I think when you talk about corporate strategy and marketing, it's not necessarily the way, especially when all your rivals have none of it and are desperately touting every achievement as the next best thing since sliced bread. Grand Seiko needs to be a little bit less humble and a little bit more willing to embrace just how good it actually is and speak up.
One of the things with the UFA is that the watch they've launched it in is not in itself distinguishable from anything else.
No, that in itself is very modest. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
They've failed, frankly, to create something that you could make a collector's piece from the get-go. Now, it's very, very Grand Seiko to do that. And it's also, completely pragmatic. And it's to do with pragmatism rather than desire. But they need to fire up that desire. And, to some extent, they've gone, okay, but look at the dials we're making and we're naming them after trees. But that isn't going far enough. And in its way, it's missing the point as well, because it's paying lip service to something and then repeating it, rather than truly building something that more fundamentally addresses that idea that Grand Seiko is something you need, rather than you just sort of you work
admire.
up and earn and admire from far. Yeah.
Yep, that's it. That's my diagnosis and prescription for Grand Seiko is bring the noise.
Okay, Chris, that was us speaking in about May 2025. It's now February 2026, and we're putting this out. So we said we'd briefly jump back in because there have been a few developments on the things we covered. And first off, big news right now, or at least big reporting right now, which suggests that your JLC breakaway idea might actually not be quite as harebrained as maybe we thought it was.
Yes, it turns out that I wasn't so far wide of the mark after all. I thought I was making an insane suggestion, really, really sort of pushing it out there. And yet, industry news outlet Miss Tweed reported recently that apparently, according to multiple sources, but not confirmed by Richemont or the brand, there are talks underway for Jaeger-LeCoultre to be the subject of a management buyout. And this would see it leave the group, as foretold.
Literally seceding. They're actually going to do it.
We should be clear. This is reported in a story that claims multiple sources, but it has not been confirmed by Richemont. It hasn't been confirmed by the brand itself. It hasn't come to pass as yet. So we wait with bated breath.
But of course, they have sold Baume & Mercier. And
yes.
So the fact that Richemont has sold one of its watch brands means obviously, A, that kind of M&A is on the table, that these things are not set, and that people are obviously looking very, very seriously at how these brands can start making money again. So I think it was amazingly prescient of you, and we'll call you the watch world Nostradamus. So another update, we were also talking about Montblanc. I was making the point that they really need to cast off Minerva and make it separate again. Now, this year, Watches and Wonders is coming up as we record this. Montblanc, for the first time ever, is not going to be part of Watches and Wonders this year. They've pulled out. They've always, since the days of SIHH, they've always been a big part of the show. Huge stand, a lot of importance. This year, no Montblanc.
Yes, its spot is being taken by H. Moser, I believe, for the physical location. But I agree. It's uncanny how this seems to be confirming what you said in the episode, and there's less meat on the bones for this. Rumour is perhaps starting to bubble away.
Yeah.
Minerva Montblanc, again, no comment, no official response, nothing to confirm this.
I think what we can infer is that there must be a change of strategy anyway, because they're not putting Montblanc in the biggest forum of watches.
Yes.
You speak to people and you hear, one, that Montblanc's volumes in terms of what the number of watches they're making have gone down hugely in the past few years. And there are, and it may just be rumours, but people talking about Minerva getting its wings back. So we will see. Then the other update is to do with Blancpain, of course. And this is more of a kind of a perception of change of direction as well, isn't it?
Yes, on the other side of the coin, really. We think things at Blancpain surprised us in a positive way towards the latter half of 2025. Listeners will probably remember the launch of the double Grand Sonnerie. I always get that the wrong way around. It's either the Grand double Sonnerie or the double Grand Sonnerie, but it's double and it's Grand.
These things can go either way, yeah. Which plays two. You can choose your chiming melody. I think there's two options, and it's a hell of a piece of design as well. And I think it does show that they've kind of gone. One of the things we were saying in the episode was that Villeray needs to kind of find its way again, the classical side away from 50 Fathoms. That certainly shows this.
I think it's a great statement of intent from Blancpain. I think it's put everyone on notice that they are back. At least in the way everyone has wanted them to be back.
Yeah. Alongside Breguet as well.
Absolutely.
Unquestionably, we were kind of lamenting the fact that Blancpain and Breguet have both been so underpowered for so long. And, there has clearly been a strategic decision to get these things going again. We'll see where that goes, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to this.
Yes, we will. We'll return to Blancpain and Breguet.
Indeed, we will be returning with Season 2 of The Watch Inquiry, because this is the final episode of Season 1, and we're already hard at work on Season 2, which will be coming later in the spring, so watch this space.
Looking forward to it.